My name is Yuchen Macdougall, and I go by Jane as well. And I am a recent. I recently moved to Adelaide or Unley in 2018. Before that, we were in Sydney, we were in WA, we were in the States, and then before that, Canada, and then finally I was born in Taiwan. So it took me a very long time to get here, but now I'm here and we really like being in South Australia, and so this is why it's the first place that me and my family have decided to settle in. So we bought a house here in Clarence Park, and this is the library, the local library that I choose to go to all the time.
You've got two young boys.
Yes.
How would you describe them culturally?
Culturally?
Yeah.
I think they're a mix of everything. I mean, my parents want me to teach them to speak Mandarin, but I'm finding that a lot more difficult to do, especially because my spouse only speaks English. So at home, we would obviously only speak English. But culturally, they do know that they're Chinese. We talk about China. We look at the world map. We call my family who still live in Taiwan. So they'll talk to my family and then we'll talk about what's in Taiwan. My older son is interested in the bullet train that they've got in Taiwan. And then we always talk about taking them back to Taiwan to see the bullet train. I tell them about the night markets in Taiwan because I grew up with night markets. It's amazing food. We eat a lot of Chinese food because I still eat a lot of Chinese food, like very, very, very traditional Chinese food. Like I'll go to Victoria Square specifically to buy chicken feet so I could cook at home because you can't actually buy. Well, you can go to a dim sum place and order chicken feet, but it's not the same. So, yeah.
So why? So you obviously want to keep those cultural traditions alive. Why is that important?
Well, I'm not sure how much of it is because I value the Chinese culture, but I also really love food. So I think most of what I've keep hold of is food, the foods that I grew up with. And I guess when I cook things like chicken feet or other types of Taiwanese treats, I guess I remember just growing up with my grandfather, who's usually the one cooking all of those things for us. And so, yeah, I think for me it feels like being able to cook those foods and then actually eat the food feels familiar to me, even though I obviously haven't lived in Taiwan in 25 years. Yeah, so I was born in Taiwan, and back in the mid-90s, my family decided to immigrate to Canada. So we went to Canada, and then I grew up in Canada. I became an adult in Canada, and then I met my husband, who's an Australian, while he was on working holiday in Canada. I met him. We did a stint living just outside of New York for a while, and then we wanted to start a family, and we wanted to have family close to family. So we thought, okay, well, let's go be close to your family. So we decided we'll move to Australia and have a family. So we lived in WA, realized there wasn't much work there for us. So we're like, okay, we'll try out Sydney. By the time we went to Sydney, we had our first son, so he was very little. And being in Sydney with a little baby made us realize, well, it's not really that great in Sydney for family. So we heard really good things about Adelaide and South Australia. So the first chance that my husband could get to get a job here, we just took it and came out here. And we first started out in Dulwich, Burnside. Rented there. It was expensive. It was nice, but it was expensive. So when we were looking at a house to actually purchase for ourselves because we really love South Australia. We're looking for neighborhoods that were really nice, but also not extremely expensive. And that's how we ended up in Clements Park and Unley. And yeah, and this library here, it's a place I've been coming to even back when I was living in Dulwich. Having moved around everywhere all of my life, one of the first things I always do whenever I'm transplanted into a new community is to get a library card. Because when I was a little kid, my first piece of identification was a library card. And for some reason that always, for me, that was like, okay, this is a piece of ID that says my name on it. That's who I am. I love books. I love being in a library. This is, yeah.
You've brought something special with you today.
Yes, this is a toy from the toy library. One thing I really love about South Australia is that it's one of the first places I've been to that they always have a toy library inside a local library. So a toy library is generally where in the community they'll have toys that were donated and what have you. And you can have the children come in and take out libraries and then return them each week and take out new ones. And I felt that was such a good idea because it means that you don't have to clutter up your own house with endless amount of toys. You can keep giving your kids new toys every week if you want it, and at no additional expense. And I felt that was really. There was a good sense of community in that. Yeah, and so that's one of the things I really like about being South Australia. There's a lot of similarities I see between Australia and Canada. Obviously there's differences, but I do see a lot of similarities. And I feel like, and especially since I got my Australian citizenship, I am starting to feel more Australian, especially as I'm subconsciously adopting more of the lingo, a lot of the Australian words that we say, and also I think I'm really enjoying learning about Australia, even through my kids. Yeah, and obviously both of them were born in Australia. So Finn was born in WA and Cole was born here at the Women's and Children's. And so for them, it's interesting learning about Australia by myself and also through them. We actually first settled in Sydney first before we went back to WA. And I remember taking a bus trip because I was going around looking for apartments to rent because we were still being put up in a corporate apartment. And on the bus, there was some guy in the back, and he's just talking to himself because he's on a bus, he's talking to himself, and he's cursing, and he started saying a very iconic Australian curse word, which I don't think I can repeat, but I just remember hearing it and hearing I've never heard that said anywhere else, and it just sounded so funny, and it stayed in my head, and I think it only took a couple of weeks for it to be the curse word I went to in my head whenever I was mad about something. I would think that word, and I'm like, that's such an Australian curse word. I would never have used it before. But yeah, I think in Canada, where I grew up, it was Vancouver, so it was very metropolitan, very, very multicultural, but at the same time segregated. So in Vancouver, you had there would be a suburb called Surrey, which is predominantly Indians. And then there would be a suburb called Richmond, which is by the airport, which is mostly Chinese people. So that's what I meant about segmentation. That even though there was multiculturalism, there was still suburbs that were mainly. And the thing is, I think that's kind of not something that you could avoid, because I feel like when people kind of transplant to a different country, to a different culture that they grew up with, they still kind of try to hold on to things that they identify with, to things that feel familiar. So they'll kind of try to seek out communities that make them feel comfortable. And so I think that's why, for a lot of people that immigrate countries, they'll end up in areas that that has a lot more of their own culture. And I think having been I feel like Sydney as a big city is more like Vancouver in that way, where they're very multicultural, but the suburbs are still very obviously, segregated between different cultures. And it's only when you go into the CBD that you would see a mix of everything because everybody works in the CBD. Adelaide, I feel like I don't notice as much of the segregation. I've been here 2 years now, and I can't really properly identify a suburb that's predominantly a specific culture. So I find that very interesting about Adelaide. Adelaide, I would say, is still multicultural. One thing that really stood out to me is there is this cafe next to my job. The cafe serves like traditional Western food. It's very Western, but the people that run it, operate the cafe and do the service and all of that, they are Taiwanese. And so I remember when I walked in there the first time, I remember my boss telling me there's this great cafe, etc. You would love it. And he's like, oh, also I think they're Chinese. And I was like, oh, really? So anyways, the first time I walked in there, I could hear automatically with them speaking Mandarin to each other. And a Taiwanese person speaking Mandarin sounds different than a mainland Chinese person speaking Mandarin because it's different tones. So I could tell it was people that came from Taiwan. And then now they own and operate a cafe that serves Western food. And so to me, I felt that was different from what I grew up with. Because when I was growing up in Canada, Chinese people owned and operated Chinese restaurants. That was what you did. But here I feel like, I don't know if it's because of it being year 2021, but I feel like people are, while still holding on to their culture, that they're starting to branch out more. I feel like there's a lot more blending. I think, yes, it's important to hold on to your roots, but there's no reason that those roots can't be a bit of everything, right? And like when I look at my kids, that's what they'll grow up with. Their identity will be, they've got a bit of everything, and that will be their roots. They don't have to be just Chinese or just Australian. They can be a bit of everything. I think the main lesson I would take away is to be open to learning, I think, open to experiences, because one of the big things I remember growing up in Canada was that there would be different attitudes in regards to, like, for me, I guess I assimilated quite well. My friendship group growing up in school was multicultural. It wasn't strictly Chinese, strictly whichever. It was multicultural. But I felt at the time I was actually alienated by groups in my school that were just mainly Chinese. So there would be a group of kids that, even though they were Chinese living in Canada, they would refuse to adopt the English language. There would be kids who had been there longer than I have that wouldn't speak English, wouldn't learn. They would go home still watching Chinese shows and only Chinese TV shows. They wouldn't, and to them, they would also obviously use the term banana when they refer to me, even though some of them would have been there longer than I have. So I think growing up with that type of feeling, that type of alienation, even though there were people technically from my own culture, to me, I think I felt conflicted by that. I didn't really understand why why some people feel they have to guard their own cultural identity so closely to the point where they refuse to take in anything else. So I think for me, I felt like I learned that early on, and that's why any place I go to, any people I come across, when I talk to them, I'm always interested to learn about where they come from, and if there was something interesting or if there was something good to take away from their background, their culture, I'll try to adopt it. I'll try to say like, yeah, that's actually a better way of doing things. So that's how I will do it.